In January 2021, Frank Lampard was sacked as the Chelsea manager as they had no style of play, sat ninth in the Premier League, and had just wasted £220 million on flops like Havertz, Werner, and Ziyech. But just 5 months later, this team of flops would lift the Champions League trophy led by a genius manager who literally outplayed everyone. But how on earth was this possible? This is the story of how Thomas Tuchel took a team of underperforming flops and literally made them the best team in Europe. Now, to understand how this all happened, we have to roll the clock back to 2019 when Maurizio Sarri was in charge of the club, and in February of that year, FIFA placed Chelsea under a 2-window transfer ban after 150 rule breaches involving academy players over several seasons, and most worryingly for the Premier League giants, their team was already miles behind Liverpool and Man City, who were dominating England with 97 and 98-point finishes. Eden Hazard, the club's best player for much of the past decade, departed for Real Madrid, and with nobody to replace their talisman, a top-4 finish seemed desperately unlikely the following season. So, with the disaster that was going on at the club, Maurizio Sarri jumped ship to join Juventus, and Chelsea, under a transfer ban and unable to attract the game's greatest minds, were scrambling around to find a new gaffer. But at this same time, Lampard, who was Chelsea's goal-scoring hero of the 2000s and 2010s, was showing promise in the championship with Derby County, and additionally, he already had pre-existing relationships with some of the club's most exciting young stars, such as Mason Mount and Fikayo Tomori, so Chelsea took a punt and hired the inexperienced manager. And after all, if Chelsea were to survive their crippling transfer ban, they'd be forced to utilize their Cobham Youth Academy, which had been overlooked for far too long. Top-tier talents including Declan Rice, Ola Aina, Nathan Ake, and Jamal Musiala had slipped through Chelsea's youth ranks in recent times, and the London club couldn't afford to continue losing or wasting their homegrown wonder kids. So Lampard turned to his trusted Derby County boys Mason Mount and Fikayo Tomori. Meanwhile, Cobham stars Tammy Abraham and Reece James, who also recently impressed during championship loan spells, were fast-tracked into the starting 11. And, against all odds, the result of Lampard's youth team-filled Chelsea side was electric. Tammy Abraham scored 19 times, Mason Mount was shortlisted for the Premier League's Young Player of the Season award, while Fikayo Tomori and Reece James enjoyed remarkable breakthrough seasons as the Blues snuck into the top 4. With Chelsea's talent factory finally utilized, a fan base reunited under their charismatic hero Frank Lampard, and the transfer ban lifted, it appeared the perfect time for Chelsea to go bigger and better than ever in the transfer window. Abramovich and Lampard, a duo destined to conquer European football for a second time, were not messing around. First through the door was Hakim Ziyech, a £36 million creative maestro who helped Ajax to an iconic 2019 Champions League semi-final finish. Then, Timo Werner, a pacey striker who scored 29 goals in the Bundesliga the previous season, sensationally rejected the Premier League champions, Liverpool, to join Chelsea for £47 million. And the London club's transfer window grew more sensational each passing week. Ben Chilwell, who was considered England's best left-back, joined for £50 million. Thiago Silva, the feared former PSG and Brazil captain, arrived on a free transfer before Kai Havertz, arguably the world's most exciting available attacking youngster at the time, signed for a staggering £72 million. It looked like Chelsea put together some sort of super team with a combination of the dazzling youngsters that just broke through, the experienced players like Kante, Rudiger, and Kovacic, and £220 million worth of summer reinforcements, but despite this, it wouldn't be long before this team would start to fall apart, and each individual player would start to be looked at as a flop, overrated, and a waste of money. Heading into the 2021 season, Chelsea won just 2 of their opening 6 Premier League fixtures and leaked goals in a style unrecognizable from the club's great teams of the past, suffering multiple 2-goal defeats to Liverpool, City, and Arsenal. Ziyech picked up an early injury while fellow attacking summer reinforcements Werner and Havertz were brutally memed for their misses and ineffectiveness in the team's most important Premier League matches. Meanwhile, in defense, despite Thiago Silva's experience and Ben Chilwell's perceived ability, Chelsea struggled to find a shape that complemented their summer arrivals. Unlike Klopp's gegenpressing Liverpool team or Guardiola's possession-based City side, Chelsea had no identity during Lampard's second season. The struggling manager helplessly switched between 4-3-1-1, 4-3-3, 3-4-2-1, and 4-1-4-1 to no avail. And to make matters worse, as rumors circulated that Rudiger vocalized his confusion about Lampard's persistently changing tactics, he was frozen out from the first team, and pressure really started to build on the English manager. The summer signings were looking like flops, the experienced players were unhappy, and results were doing Lampard no favors either. So club owner Roman Abramovich had to do something. On January 19, 2021, Chelsea lost 2-0 to Leicester, making for an inexcusable run of 1 win in 5 matches, and just like that, Lampard was sacked as Chelsea manager, with leaving the club in shambles with a team of overpriced underperformers, and this mess would take some real cleaning up. But of course, a miracle was going to happen soon. The thing was that Lampard getting the sack was no surprise. This was the Chelsea cycle, because Abramovich would only give a manager a season or 2 to succeed. There was no process, only immediate success. Rule was simple: win major trophies or get out. Yet even Abramovich surely couldn't have foreseen any managerial change drastically altering Chelsea's fortunes, because despite their £220 million summer spend, the Londoners sat 9th in the Premier League table. And competing with Liverpool and Manchester City for the title seemed inconceivable, as Chelsea had to focus on beating the likes of Leicester City and West Ham United first. They'd qualified for the knockout stages of the Champions League, but they were completely written off. After all, if they were being humiliated by the Premier League's mid-table clubs, they couldn't even bruise Real Madrid, Barcelona, or Bayern Munich. This is when a hero arrived in London, a man who would somehow transform a team of flops into a machine that would beat anyone. So, on January 26th, Thomas Tuchel was appointed on an 18-month contract with an almost unrealistic goal of delivering trophies before the end of the season. And, as difficult as this would be, the former PSG boss reiterated the desire for immediate success in his introductory Chelsea interview. It is about winning. The DNA of the club is to win and go for trophies. I'm here to challenge for every trophy. This year, it is the Champions League and the FA Cup. Despite his credentials earned through illustrious periods at PSG and Borussia Dortmund, few took Tuchel's Champions League optimism seriously. How could a squad of flops, internet memes, and frozen-out failures outplay the superstar-filled teams of City, Liverpool, and Madrid? But Tuchel, unlike the tactically naive Lampard, was pragmatic. He believed in defensive stability, optimizing space out of possession, and brutally hitting teams on the counterattack with pace and quality. Instantly, the new Chelsea boss ditched Lampard's confusing tactics and simplified their game plan. During Tuchel's opening game, a dull 0-0 tie at home to Wolverhampton Wanderers, Chelsea switched to a back 3 with Silva, Rudiger, and Azpilicueta named as the center-backs pairing for the first time. As supporters saw the world-class trio, most notably Rudiger, who'd been frozen out by Lampard, line up alongside each other, suddenly a cautious sense of optimism swept over Stamford Bridge. Chelsea won each of their next 4 Premier League matches and conceded just once with their new 3-4-2-1 system, but they were still dismissed by outsiders as a team of overpaid flops when they traveled to the cauldron-like atmosphere of Atletico Madrid in the Champions League last 16. The Spanish side topped La Liga and possessed a devastating attack of Luis Suarez, Joao Felix, Angel Correa, and Thomas Lemar, and looked set to inflict damage on Chelsea's newly assembled defensive structure. Yet, once again, Tuchel's team remained resolute. Giroud notched a carefully placed left-footed effort to send Chelsea back to Stamford Bridge with an unlikely 1-0 advantage. In the 4 games between the first and second leg against Atletico, which included tricky games against Liverpool and United, Chelsea kept another 4 clean sheets, and their doubters were beginning to retract their claims. Tuchel's team of previously considered flops bulldozed past Simeone's La Liga leaders with a comfortable 2-0 win, and suddenly, Chelsea wasn't just a strong defensive unit, they were an attacking force to be reckoned with. Summer signings Havertz, Ziyech, and Werner were intricately linking up for goals, destroying teams on the break with their balance of pace, skill, and creativity, and were finally looking like the outfit Abramovich and Lampard intended them to be at the start of the season. Meanwhile, Lampard's Cobham boys, Mason Mount, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Reece James, and Billy Gilmore received the same exposure they received under their previous boss, but had a structure which enabled them to maximize their ability. James, freed from Lampard's rigid back 4, played the wing-back role, complementing the Londoners' attacking threat and neutralizing defensive fragilities and inexperience with a dependable back 3 ready to support him. Mount was ridiculed for being Lampard's love child, but remained among the first names on the team sheet under Tuchel. The German gaffer's refined system gave Mount stability as he flourished with 5 goals in Tuchel's first 10 matches. So, with the continued integration of Chelsea's academy prospects, clear communication with players, and game-changing tactical expertise, Tuchel quickly became the most popular man in West London. His team of written-off stars looked on the cusps of doing something special. Chelsea eased past Porto and Sheffield United in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup and Champions League. Meanwhile, in the 12-game Premier League form table since Tuchel's late January arrival, Chelsea were second, only behind Guardiola's Manchester City. But to be the best, Tuchel would have to beat the best, and in a season-defining 3-week period, Chelsea would face City twice, once in the FA Cup and once in the league with European qualification on the line, and not to mention facing Real Madrid twice too, as they were drawn in the Champions League semi-final. Which meant that the next month was going to be the most important time in Tuchel's entire career. But very quickly before we get to this, I just want to ask you to subscribe. I put so much effort into these videos and your support means the world to me, so thank you. Okay, now let's get back to the story because things are really starting to get crazy. On April 17th, Chelsea faced Man City in an FA Cup semi-final tie under the gleaming Wembley Arch. Guardiola's team was filled with stars as the likes of Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne, and Joao Cancelo confidently lined up alongside Chelsea's still relatively unproven team in the stadium's iconic tunnel. But despite the confidence of Man City's greats, the game didn't go according to plan. City tried to attack Tuchel's system, but the back five of Ben Chilwell, Thiago Silva, Antonio Rudiger, Cesar Azpilicueta, and Reece James were unflustered. The Premier League leaders were limited to half chances as they slowly passed the ball from side to side. Eventually, a ball was intricately slipped in behind to Werner, who used his blistering pace and squared the ball to Ziyech, who slotted it into the open net. 1-0. Despite City's best efforts, they were unable to draw level after 90 minutes. It was a monumental victory for the London club, but more importantly, an insane confidence boost for both the players and the manager as they now believe they could go toe-to-toe with Guardiola and win. And this is something that would be really important through the rest of the season as they would face Guardiola's men another 2 times, with the last being the most important game of their lives. After this first match against City, Guardiola began to overthink. He had just been tactically outclassed, and his overthinking would prove to bite him later on. But for now, Chelsea continued to charge. They arrived at the towering stands of the Bernabeu with a newfound swagger, a belief they could comfortably withstand the pressure of the world's greatest teams. Tuchel's side earned a respectable 1-1 draw in Madrid as they limited the La Liga Titans to a handful of chances. Zinedine Zidane's star-studded squad were forced to travel without an advantage to Stamford Bridge, but at this time, stadiums were empty because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but still, there was something different in the air at Stamford Bridge during the second leg against Madrid. It was as if the souls of supporters from Chelsea's great European ties of years gone by returned to the stadium to unsettle Real. And unsettled they were as the Champions League dominant side crumbled. Tuchel's team hunted them like dogs and bullied their way to a 2-0 win and a place in the tournament's final, thanks to goals from Mason Mount and Timo Werner. The German striker was visibly crushed by confidence during a difficult first half of the campaign under Lampard. But thanks to the man management and confidence instilled by his countryman manager, Werner suddenly stood proud and tall as he was making the difference in the most important games. Tuchel would have to continue playing mind games to strike belief into his players and fear into his opposition, because in the Champions League final, Chelsea would face Premier League rivals Man City again. Guardiola must have been filled with dread once he learned he'd come up against Tuchel's regimented defensive setup, a tactical system that fooled him in the FA Cup semi a couple of weeks earlier in what would be the biggest game in City's history. But the genius Spanish manager would have another opportunity to understand Tuchel's deadly 3-4-2-1 formation because City, who had already clinched the Premier League, hosted Chelsea at the Etihad Stadium in the final weeks of the league campaign. For Guardiola, his players, and their adoring supporters, the May 8th Premier League clash with Chelsea was only about warming up for the Champions League final at the end of the month. City matched Tuchel's back five structure, and for a moment it looked like they'd found the secret to beating the Chelsea side who were defeating Europe's best. With Rodri dictating play from deep in midfield, City eventually found an opening as Sergio Aguero tapped the ball to Raheem Sterling, who smashed the ball home. But the second half wasn't played with the same ease. Aguero missed a penalty and City lost all composure. Ziyech, who scored against City at Wembley, slotted impressively to level the game as Chelsea started to bombard and expose Guardiola's side's weaknesses out of possession. In the final minutes, Werner crossed the ball to Alonso, who scrambled the ball in to secure an unlikely win at the Etihad. Thomas Tuchel had done it again. 2 games against the Premier League Titans in a month, 2 tactical masterclasses, and 2 statement victories that caused Guardiola to lose his mind ahead of the final a few weeks later. The Champions League final would be among the first matches supporters were allowed to attend since the coronavirus pandemic. While approximately 14,000 City and Chelsea fans excitedly flocked to Porto for the biggest game of the year, Guardiola must have been locked away in a dark room fighting his racing thoughts. Because the former Barcelona manager's team selection for the final was bizarre, as City had struggled to break down Tuchel's defense in the previous 2 encounters, scoring just once over 180 minutes. Guardiola opted for an additional attacking midfielder at the expense of their trusty anchorman Rodri. City lined up with Ilkay Gundogan, Phil Foden, and Bernardo Silva in midfield, 3 excellent technicians capable of inflicting damage on Chelsea's resolute structure, but without a defensive man to protect City in transition, which was an area Tuchel's side had proven deadly during previous encounters. To continue City's instabilities, Pep moved away from the back 5 that featured in the previous game with Chelsea and switched to a 4-3-3. As the German gaffer read Guardiola's lineup, he must have felt the battle of his career was already half won. How could his genius rival manager not select a defensive midfielder and change formation for a game of such magnitude? Perhaps the tactical genius was finally losing his mind. This wasn't the time for experimentation. Tuchel persisted in the trusted 3-4-2-1 formation that had brought the London club so much joy since Lampard departed the club a few months earlier. Summer signings Edouard Mendy, Ben Chilwell, Thiago Silva, Kai Havertz, and Timo Werner, each of whom were doubted for their misfires at the start of the season, featured in Tuchel's starting 11. Meanwhile, Mason Mount and Reece James, 2 players previously considered as little more than Lampard's favorites, were also trusted in the lineup to take down Guardiola's City. As the players emerged through the tunnel for the season's decisive game, there was a clear contrast in the mentalities of the 2 teams. City looked tired, unorganized, and ill-focused, as if their manager Guardiola had been distracted or unclear over the previous days. A few meters to the left, Chelsea's players, confident and assured in their familiar tactics instructed to them by Tuchel, stood tall, determined, and focused like warriors entering a coliseum to fight to the death. And that's exactly what Tuchel's flops turned heroes did. Of course, there would be moments of panic, periods without touching the ball, and fortunate escapes against Guardiola's world-class City team. But almost every time they entered Chelsea's box, one of the London club's resurgent defenders was there to rescue them. Eventually, after soaking up the pressure for much of the first half, it happened. Chelsea's previously written-off strugglers took the lead against Manchester City in the Champions League final. Mount played a wonderful ball through to Havertz, arguably not just Chelsea's but the Premier League's most discussed flop during the first half of the season, who rounded the keeper to give his team the lead. And as a result of Chelsea's strong defense, City reverted back to the painful side-to-side passing that brought them little joy during the previous 2 matches and predictably failed to find a way through. After comfortably seeing out the second half, Chelsea had done it. They won the Champions League for the 2nd time in the London club's history, elevating their status among Europe's most successful clubs. Scenes of jubilation swept the pitch. The much-debated Cobham graduates, the previous summer's expensive signings, and experienced heads frozen out by Lampard huddled together to celebrate one of the historic competition's most unlikely winners. After this match, almost everybody was in agreement about one thing: Thomas Tuchel was a football genius. And the following season, with the Champions League trophy sitting proudly at the forefront of their trophy cabinet, Chelsea remained solid, winning the Super Cup and Club World Cup and finishing 3rd in the Premier League. Tuchel's team almost knocked eventual winners Real Madrid out of the Champions League in back-to-back years, but fell victim to a late comeback by the Galacticos. But then, to everyone's surprise, despite Tuchel's success and clear understanding of how to win the Stamford Bridge Club silverware, Chelsea were undergoing serious changes. Abramovich was forced to sell the club to a controversial American consortium who bizarrely sacked Tuchel at the start of the 22-23 campaign, which now has proved to be a colossal error, and it can be seen as the negative turning point in Chelsea Football Club. Chelsea dropped to an unthinkable 12th place finish as players like Havertz, Chilwell, Mount, James and Mendy reverted to their form displayed under Lampard at the start of the 2021 campaign. Today, most of Chelsea's major 2020 summer signings have been sold after failing to consistently produce the goods. Timo Werner performed so badly he ended up at London rivals Tottenham Hotspur, where he continues to struggle today. Meanwhile, academy stars Mount, James and Abraham, among others, have failed to realize the potential they threatened during their time under Tuchel. Perhaps Chelsea's 2021 team truly was a team of underperformers. It just had the tactical genius of Tuchel to hold it together and win the most unlikely title in Champions League history. What a story! But what if I told you that Thomas Tuchel wasn't the only manager to take over a failing team and bring them Champions League glory? In fact, Carlo Ancelotti did it twice. So, check the video on screen now.